So let's raise the big questions. Is Budget 2024 being driven by coalition compulsions as the opposition alleges? Is the opposition justified to call it a Bihar-Andhra Pradesh budget? Has the 2024 poll results put jobs and employment on top of the agenda for the Modi government? Is the budget really offering a roadmap for the future? And is India poised to take advantage of that? And joining us now on our budget political face-off, Shashi Tharoor, Senior Congress Member of Parliament, joins us. And joining us now is Milind Deora, member of the NDA from the Shiv Sena Shinde group, Member of Parliament. Appreciate both of you joining us on the show. Gentlemen, I'm going to look at specific political talking points out of the budget, and let's start with the first talking point. The belief that the opposition has is that this is a budget that has been driven by coalition compulsions. Shashi Tharoor, when your leader Rahul Gandhi says it's a kursi bachao budget, what exactly are you suggesting? The fact is that this is a coalition government and therefore has reached out to its allies like Nitish Kumar and Chandrababu Naidu by giving them special allocations. Why should that be called kursi bachao?
It's exactly what it is. This country has 28 states and half a dozen union territories, but there's only 2 that have been given any attention at all. After all, when you look at the fact that there are needs in the states that are not ruled by the NDA, doesn't the government have any obligations for them? How can you categorically exclude states like Karnataka, which sought drought relief, Tamil Nadu, which sought cyclone relief, where apparently tourism is going to be restricted only to Bihar and Odisha, where they're in power, where you give 26,000 crores in highway projects for Bihar, but you give nothing for Karnataka, which made specific requests for Bengaluru's infrastructure. You give irrigation money to Bihar, but you give nothing for Karnataka. There are issues that you can raise right across the board on this. So yes, it is kursi bachao. All the focus is on Andhra and Karnataka, but don't forget Andhra. All the NDA has done is repeated the same promises it made 10 years earlier and failed to keep, which led Mr. Chandrababu Naidu at that time to actually move a vote of no confidence against Mr. Modi in Parliament. So let's wish him better luck this time.
Let me just clarify. Let me clarify, Dr. Tharoor. Between 2014 and 18, Chandrababu Naidu was pressing for special status for Andhra. This budget has given allocations to Andhra, including for the capital Amravati, but it hasn't given special status.
Not exactly. The budget is committed to arranging 15,000 crores towards Amravati. It is not an allocation. It just requires the center to facilitate loans from multilateral development organizations or whoever else. So the fact is that instead of providing financial support for Amravati, it's actually going to be increasing Andhra Pradesh's debt burden. So let's not say that they've given them, they've allocated money to Amravati. They haven't. What they have done is they've supported the Polavaram project, which they had supported 10 years ago, and then downscaled and not helped. And that's one of the factors that was cited in the no confidence motion by Chandrababu Naidu.
Let Milind Deora respond to that. Milind Deora, respond to what you're hearing from Shashi Tharoor, that the budget has been directed to appease allies because you are a coalition government. Your first concern was how do we keep Chandrababu Naidu and Nitish Kumar in good humor. Other states, as Shashi Tharoor stated, there are 28 states and 8 union territories in this country.
Yeah, firstly, let me just say that Shashi is a very dear personal friend. Shashi is someone I hold in high regard as not a political spokesperson who will criticize or blindly support a government initiative depending on which side he's on. I respect him for that. Unfortunately for the opposition, there are 2 things which are not going their way. One is that this government, as soon as it was formed, the opposition thought that this government would collapse at any second, that Chandrababu Naidu would pull out and not work with the NDA and he would go to the India alliance. They thought Nitish Kumar would not do that. Unfortunately, this government is stable and will be stable for the next 5 years. Unfortunately for the opposition, the economy on every parameter, Rajdeep, whether you look at the credit offtake, the health of the financial sector, the health of banks, the fact that inflation is coming down, the fact that unemployment is coming down, the fact that we are moving supply chains away from China, becoming self-dependent, able to create, for example, move from becoming an importer of mobile phones and electronics to becoming a net exporter of electronics. Just today, in fact, in the newspaper, there was an article about how Apple company's iPhones, 14% of their global iPhones worth around 14 billion US dollars are now being manufactured in India. And India's share in manufacturing of electronics from having a $0.6 billion deficit, we've gone to having a $9 billion surplus.
But may I stop you on for a moment, because I asked you a question on Andhra. I asked you a question on Andhra and Bihar.
I'll come to that.
Yes.
When someone says that there's not enough for other states, the finance minister clearly in a budget speech mentioned that there will be a allocation made for even a state like Assam, which has borne the brunt of floods. Is Assam going to elections? Is there a party from Assam that is supporting or holding this government up, as the opposition alleges? So I think these are very unfair statements. I remember in 2004 to 2009, when the UPA government was being supported by 65 MPs from the left, every single budget was being catered to the communists, either in Kerala or in West Bengal. That is where you can allege that a government is being propped up by its allies, being supported by its allies, and is appeasing them. And mind you, at that time, the Congress party had 145 MPs, with 65 MPs from the left supporting it. This government today has 240 MPs from the ruling government party and 30 odd MPs from parties like mine that are supporting it. So I think it's unfair to say that because you can argue that more initiatives have been announced in a budget. Many of these are also optics for Andhra and Bihar, that these are the only two states that are being focused on. I know, for instance, my own state, Maharashtra, a 76,000 crore project called the Vadhavan Port has been approved by the Union Cabinet. This wasn't announced in the budget, but it was approved a few months ago. This has wide ramifications for the maritime security of our country, for the economic prosperity of our country, not just for the Mumbai metropolitan region of Maharashtra, but for the country as a whole.
Okay.
So I think this is a union budget. This should not be seen as what is announced in a budget for one state or another state. Every state has received allocation across the board from an infrastructure point of view.
We can dispute whether every state has been given equal allocation, and we can certainly dispute whether Bihar and Andhra have got specific allocations unlike the other states. But let's move to the second big question I want to raise politically, which is that
you said we can challenge each other.
Please go ahead.
While Milind went through his talking points, my good friend Milind, very energetically, the fact is that, it's all very well talking about Apple making lots of profits in India. When are you going to talk about India's MSMEs and their terrible condition at the moment in this country? When are we going to talk about health and education? When are we going to talk about the needs of the real Indian people? And you talk about Maharashtra getting some allocation some months ago, but in this budget, what have they got? I don't know whether you've seen the reactions of some people in your own state, Milind. The terrible state of the Mumbai-Nashik, Mumbai-Ahmedabad, Mumbai-Goa highways, not even mentioned, no allocations therefore. What is the special allocation for Maharashtra that you've got? It's only essentially an Andhra-Bihar budget at the moment. So I have some real questions to ask Milind, but I realize we have other topics to cover as well.
I want to move on to the second one.
Can I respond, or do you want to move on?
Yeah, I'll give you 30 seconds to respond. If you speak, because since he mentioned Maharashtra, he's saying Maharashtra, where elections are to take place 3 months from now, according to Shashi Tharoor, has been hard done by.
Yeah. Well, if you look at the budget allocation, where you look at National Highways Authority of India, you look at railways, if you look at the allocation for Maharashtra, you go into the details of how much spends are being allocated to the state. They are massively high. Now, one can argue, why is Maharashtra getting so much? I can counter that by saying Maharashtra is the second largest state in terms of population. Today, I brought about the point of Vadhavan Port. A 76,000 crore project could have gone to another state. It could have gone to Andhra Pradesh. Andhra Pradesh is a coastal state. If that had happened, yes, one would have said everything is going to Andhra Pradesh. It's gone to Maharashtra. Why has it gone to Maharashtra? It could have gone to another western state. It could have gone to Gujarat. It could have gone to Kerala, Shashi. So let's not get into these details. I can also counter you on where Maharashtra has been allocated a substantial amount of funds whether it's in roads, whether it's in highways, whether it's in railways.
The jury, gentlemen, is out. The jury, gentlemen, therefore, is out whether this specific budget had eye clearly on Bihar and Andhra Pradesh, which many would expect was expected given the fact that they are the two key ally states. Let's turn to the next question, and this time I'll start with you, Mr. Deora, because the Congress has made an allegation saying that this is a copy-paste budget. Congress manifesto, particularly when it comes to the so-called internship program. The Congress, in its Nyay Patra, had a right to apprenticeship. The BJP has borrowed it, cut and paste, and called it a right to internship. You borrowed what the Congress scheme, only changed the name.
Rajdeep, the right to an apprenticeship or right to having internships, or the government getting involved in placing young Indians as interns in the corporate sector has been talked about for years in India. With due respect to my former party, if they want to take credit for adopting something that has been talked about for years, I wish them well. During COVID, the Congress party was talking about giving money to people, putting money in the hands of people during COVID. World over, by the way, the government rejected that idea, and world over, government after government, especially in the Western countries, said putting money in the hands of people led to massive spikes in inflation, which resulted in governments having to increase interest rates, which then hurt growth. Let's elevate ourselves, Rajdeep, beyond politics. I understand we have to talk politics, and I understand.
No, how is the government? Mr. Deora, how is the scheme which the government has announced?
I'm not here just to make political points.
The point is that okay, just a minute. Let Shashi Tharoor, 1 minute, sir.
The point is that, Rajdeep, 1 second.
Yes.
The point is this. Please understand what is happening around the world. The world's global growth rate is 3% today. India is poised to grow at around 7% per annum. That on its own is a huge achievement for India, number one. Number two, India's biggest competitor, its neighbor next door, China, its growth rate is beginning to stall. It's having a financial crisis. It's having a housing crisis. Its biggest companies are going bankrupt. It has an aging population. There are many other concerns. The world over, investors, global companies, I talk to many of them. They're adopting two strategies. One is called a China Plus One strategy, where they're moving manufacturing away from China, looking at countries like India and Vietnam. And two, they're adopting a policy called ABC, which stands for Anywhere But China. We will invest in any country but China. It's for India to make use of those tailwinds. It's for India to use incentives to create employment here. It's for India to use incentives.
So you're saying it's an incentive, Mr. Deora, given the limited time and that both of you deserve equal time, I've heard your view. You're saying it's an incentive scheme designed to create growth. Shashi Tharoor, respond, because the Congress seems to believe that the BJP has simply borrowed a Congress scheme and put it out. If it's a good one, you can take credit for it, but why blame the BJP if they want to, in a way, at least focus on employment? The word was 23 times. The word was used 23 times today. No, just a minute, Milind.
Congress or any opposition party has given a good suggestion.
Scheme,
it's a good thing. They must be constructive.
One by one, please. Yeah, go ahead, Shashi.
So we talked about an apprenticeship scheme which would have paid people 8,000 a month and which would have actually trained them for a job, whereas the internship scheme is just an internship and it only pays 5,000 rupees a month. So that makes already one big difference. Second thing is they're allowing CSR money to be diverted to this kind of expenditure, which frankly, CSR money is meant to be spent on the improvement of problems in society. This way, essentially, companies will be allowed to spend CSR money on themselves in the name of employment. So again, that's a dilution. But I would appreciate you're also giving me a chance to respond to Milind on all this talk about growth and development, investment, and so on. In fact, the truth of the matter is that our foreign direct investment is going down. You talk about comparing with China, compare with Vietnam instead, which is in a similar stage of development. They've outstripped us in every particular respect. It's not that India is shining by any global yardstick. Yes, we are a large, major economy that thank God is growing, but a lot of that growth is entirely because we have a huge, large population that's producing goods and services for each other. The truth is that the government's policies have failed. Make in India has failed colossally, for one example. And FDI has actually gone down in record levels in the course of this last fiscal year. So I'm sorry, Milind, the news is not all good when it comes to foreign investment. One good thing I will applaud, though, is the angel tax, because I said this to Arun Jaitley in 2016 in the Lok Sabha. There's a YouTube video of me suggesting this, and here we are 8 years later actually implementing it.
By the way, this was Mr. Dr. Tharoor, may I point out, this was a tax brought in by your government, Congress government, in 2012.
But I suggested in 2016 that we get rid of it, or at least reduce it. Neither was done, and finally they've taken the good step 8 years after my exchange with Arun Jaitley at that time. I mean, the truth is that we need investment. We're not getting enough of it inside. In fact, the government keeps giving tax breaks to the ultra-rich, and they're not investing it in the economy. Giving some money into the hands of the poor, as Manrega does, would actually enable people to give money that would stimulate consumption in our society. But the government didn't even mention Manrega in its speech today.
But they did mention employment 23 times, which Milind Deora seems to suggest that the government has decided to put jobs at the top of its agenda. Somewhere is there an acceptance in this budget, particularly on that issues like Rozgar will now have to be addressed head on, that you can't constantly talk up the economy without looking at the glass as half empty, Milind Deora.
Yes, employment is of critical importance. And as I said, using government incentives like production-linked incentives to create employment, to reduce our dependence on Chinese supply chains. I would add even to green our economy. All of these work hand in hand. It's not an either-or debate. If you green your economy, you can create green jobs also. Countries like America and Sweden have done that, mind you. A country like Sweden, by the way, Rajdeep, in the last 30 years, reduced their carbon emissions by 80%. But in those 3 decades, grew the economy by twofold also. So I believe that incentives have been used. When someone says Make in India is a colossal failure, I can't understand this because I was an IT minister in the UPA era when we were a massive importer of electronics and mobile phones. And we were essentially using our consumers here in India to subsidize the Chinese workforce. Today, we're a net exporter. Today, Indians are getting employed. How is Make in India failed?
Okay.
And to Shashi's point, I don't wish to put him on the spot, but you talk about investments. How do you attract investments? At a party level, at a political level, also you have to be clear that you have to attract investments, you have to encourage growth to create jobs. Shashi in his own area encouraged the development of a port. I credit him for that. I was shipping minister. We worked together to develop the Viriniyam port, which is of strategic importance in this country. It's the southernmost port in this country. It's an important transshipment hub. But his party is opposed to industrialists who are setting up that port.
Okay, that port for our viewers is being set up by the Adanis. That port for our viewers is being set up, but Shashi.
Rajdeep, one second. Rajdeep,
Yes.
1 second. You're from Maharashtra. Today in Gadchiroli, which was a Naxal hotbed, as you are aware, it was part of the Red Corridor in India. Recently, the government of Maharashtra, led by Mr. Shinde and Mr. Fadnavis, to their credit, laid the foundation stone for a 10,000 crore steel plant, which will cater to almost 10% of India's steel output, will create 7,000 jobs in an area that was written off by previous governments. Mind you, what was the era in UPA about Naxalism? One senior leader of a party writing an op-ed in a newspaper about the home minister who's trying to weed out Naxalism. They were sending confusing signals to
Can I therefore,
Can I just respond on FDI investment?
Yeah, please do. Milind, you made your point. Let Shashi Tharoor respond. Yes.
FDI as a ratio of GDP has collapsed from about 2% of GDP to 0.5% of GDP in the last fiscal year. The actual FDI, that is, once you take into account the withdrawals of about $44 billion in the course of the last year, actual FDI in the last fiscal year is only 26 billion, which is not only a 37% drop, but is actually the lowest FDI levels in our country since 2006. So I don't think that Milind can get away with suggesting that investment's going up. It's actually going down on the Modi government's watch.
Can I though both ask you in conclusion, if there is one thing, first you Shashi Tharoor and then I'll get Milind to conclude. What is the one thing you would have done that this government didn't do in the budget? You know, it's very easy to be in the opposition and keep criticizing. What is the one thing you would have done that this government did not do today?
we would have definitely emphasized greater on health and education, both of which have seen a reduction in allocations at a time when the needs of the nation are extremely great. We would have stuck to the letter of our proposal on employment, that is, that we would have actually gone for full-scale apprenticeship and spent a lakh a year on each individual and not let it come out of CSR funds, so we wouldn't have diluted it as the government has done. And we would have certainly done something about income inequality. What specifically, that is for the finance experts in the party to say. But we are really appalled by the fact that 80% of the Indian population has witnessed a decline in their incomes in the last 10 years of Modi government rule, and only 20% have benefited from these economic measures of the government. There's something terribly wrong there. When people can't afford, food inflation is 9.4% today. That means that people can't afford to buy at the market what they could have bought last year at this time for a simple meal to eat. That's the kind of crisis that ordinary people are facing, and we simply can't afford to talk in the air about the big picture, where the big picture itself is doing badly, as I pointed out, at a time when there's been such neglect of the Aam Aadmi and their preoccupations in the country today.
Okay, Milind Deora, what according to you is for you the highlight of this budget, and what's the big miss?
I would say this firstly, Rajdeep. I believe that, rhetoric aside, creating an over-dependence on the government ultimately harms the government and ultimately harms the individual and the Indian citizen. I too believe that inflation needs to come under control. We need to create employment. But how do you do that? The government has to invest in sectors that create jobs. The government has to invest, for instance, in infrastructure. When the government increases its outlay of infrastructure, as this government has, to 3.5% of the country's GDP, when you say I'm going out and building a massive highway in a particular area, you create ancillary industries as a result of that. You automatically give people employment. You automatically also roll out your infrastructure. You can also solve green issues. So I would say that the government increasing its spend in infrastructure is a good thing. I think the government reducing its fiscal deficit is a good thing. Otherwise, you're increasing the per capita debt on future generations.
Okay.
Shashi and I can say, let's give people more money. Let's give people 1 lakh rupees for an apprenticeship. Who bears that bill? Future generations will have to bear that bill. You have to be fiscally prudent as we are in our own homes. One area which I would say as a suggestion, which I think the government can relook at, is, for instance, to encourage more investors to deepen capital markets, which is a huge source of small businesses, medium businesses, micro businesses, large enterprises to raise capital, is from the stock market. To deepen the market, to get people to invest for the long term, not for the short term, not only to encourage day traders, but to encourage long-term investors. It's important to reduce the long-term capital gains, which means essentially, if you invest in the stock market for a longer period of time, you pay a lower tax. Unfortunately, that percentage, although it's lower than short-term gains, has been increased from 10% to 12.5%. That would be one area which I would urge the Finance Ministry and the government to review again.
Okay, I also would do that, considering I might be adversely affected by that. But to both of you, Milind Deora and Shashi Tharoor, I don't know how you coordinated your clothes, but you are both looking very striking in blue. Suggests that there are still some bonds that remain even when people move away and are in different parties, but always good to have two articulate voices expressing themselves. Milind Deora, Shashi Tharoor, for joining me on my political face-off on Budget 2024. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rajiv. Thanks, Milind.